A very, very good afternoon to anybody watching. My name is Mark Drax. I'm on the board of SASH, and I have the incredible pleasure this afternoon to be having what we call a conversation from the couch with Dr. Candice Hargons. Dr. Candice, a very, very good afternoon to you. Thank you for giving us your time. It's so lovely to be with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation with you too.
Well, it's such a special topic. What you do is incredible work. Tell our audience where you are, Candice, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I am at the University of Kentucky in the counseling psychology program. I'm serving as associate professor and interim department chair this year. And I study sexual wellness as well as healing racial trauma. So in addition to the sexual wellness piece, I also run the Center for Healing Racial Trauma.
I love on your website, if you look at Candice's website, which I will happily give this a push for you, it's drcandicenicole.com. If you look at that, you will find on the about, I love this. I just had to read this out to you. When I read this out, I thought, you write here, University of Kentucky Assistant Professor, Center for Healing Racial Trauma Director, mom, wife, UGA PhD, Delta, Spielman alumni, friend, sister, daughter. I've never seen someone sort of introduce themselves like that. I think it's so cool and it's warm. So again, very special. Teaching. How did you get into teaching?
So this is the funny part. I remember being the type of kid who played school.
No.
So I've always been the type of person who liked to teach. I have a few younger siblings, but my sister, who's immediately under me, would always have to be the student. So whether it was teaching math and reading or teaching like choreography for dance, I've always been a teacher. Fantastic. And then I chose the formal route. That was my first career before psychology. So I taught high school for a few years and realized my dream of being a psychologist. I wanted to be a psychologist when I was 16. Like, I actually have turned my classrooms into group therapy sessions. So it's probably time to pursue the thing that I came to do.
Amazing. God, what a fun. And you've clearly worked very, very hard. I do recommend Candice's website. It's full of amazing stuff. Today, you tackle such important topics, Candice, and I just want to shoot the breeze with you for about a half an hour about what you do. Could you start by just giving our audience a roundabout description of what you do, but more importantly, how you got into the real essence of what is so important to you in your work?
Sure. So I like to say that I'm a hot girl scientist. And a hot girl scientist, yes, a hot girl scientist is a person who studies sexuality through a sex positive lens while having fun, citing the works of Black women and people who are a friend in word and deed to Black women, and doing it from the lens that this is not all about deficits, but also about pleasure. And a lot of times in Black sexuality research, you'll see HIV and unplanned pregnancy and STIs, and those are the focal points of the research, whereas my research is about like pleasure and good sex and desire and orgasm and all the sexual functioning things that we know are equally as wonderful and useful to know about.
I love the way you sit there and just so calm and talk about things which many people do find very hard to talk about. It's funny, I was literally interviewing somebody else more specifically for our upcoming conference earlier today, and they are talking about kink and consensual non-monogamy. Yeah. There are so many aspects of the entire sexual spectrum which are so difficult to talk about. You're talking about something which is, well, let me ask you, why is it so important? What's the connection to sexual health that makes your work so important?
I think the important thing for me is for Black people in particular, sexual health has been wrought with all of these stereotypes, and the liberation of having a sexually healthy, pleasurable life can free you from all of these things. We call it respectability politics, where you feel like you have to uphold a certain image of yourself so that you don't confirm stereotypes. And it's like, actually, I just want to be a human being and have a good time, be consensual and healthy, but very much enjoy the experience. And so I try to approach my research through that lens that most people will get into sex because they want to enjoy it, not because they're thinking about all of these other things that can be risks or are fearful. And there's a way to balance that. So I love talking about sex. I enjoy the conversations. I've loved it for a very long time. So I was like I said, being a teacher early on, when I was in high school, I was the person who was reading the magazines and the encyclopedia and talking to my friends about this is how you're healthy. And these are the type of condoms that work. And this, just giving them sex ed that we weren't getting in school.
But has that been fraught with challenge? A lady, I mean, I think what you do is brilliant, and I'm thrilled you're doing it. But clearly, if we have to be realistic, painfully realistic for a second, and it's weird. I was saying exactly the same thing to the people I was interviewing earlier. You know, when a man has a lot of sex, he's considered a cool, a dude, a stud. When a woman has a lot of sex, she's seen as sleeping around, or worse, a slut. Yep. A woman coming into your field, psychology, and then exploring very openly sex, which of course so many men still want to see as something they are entitled to do in the manner they're entitled to do it, and whereas women should do as they're told, and the whole Madonna whore syndrome. How difficult has it been for you to follow a path into this field?
You know, I don't think it's been difficult because of the way that I approach it. It hasn't been difficult because I really don't give a lot of credibility to people who don't care about me. And so,
wow.
Right. And a lot of times people who are approaching it like, you need to be this and you should be this, haven't demonstrated any level of care or willingness to invest in me or invest in women. And so why would I give credibility to their lens if it hasn't facilitated my well-being or my advancement in any way? And I know that can be tough to do for folks, especially if you are in an area or in a field where maybe you hear negative messages about your gender, your sexuality, or your race, or any of these aspects of your identity a lot. But I think a part of liberation for me has been deciding who has shown me love and care. Those are the perspectives that matter to me, and who has not. And those are the perspectives that I can look at and say, what part of this can Velcro and I can be useful, and what part of this can go in the garbage because it has nothing to do with me. It's more of them working through whatever their internalized oppressions are. And I wish them well in that work, but it's not for me.
What I'm hearing and what you're saying is very much pulling the rug. This may sound too simplistic, but pulling the rug from under the feet of bullies. Because when you don't give a bully what they need, which is your pain, when you stand up and say, you know what, this isn't my problem, this is clearly yours. You can keep it. I don't need it. You effectively pull the wind from their lungs. There's nowhere for them to go. Am I right there?
Absolutely. Because why would you need to harm someone? Like, to what extent is harming someone going to do anything good for you, or even constricting someone? So when you're thinking about things like kink or BDSM or sexualities across the spectrum, like, why would I want to constrict somebody else's well-being? What is that in me that needs to be worked out because I want to do that? And I don't know what that is for everyone. Everyone has their different flavor of pain. But yeah, I couldn't, if I buy into it, that then gives them a lot more power than they deserve. And I don't have time for that.
In my experience of life, and it's, I've been down a few rabbit holes in my time. So one of the biggest things I've struggled with is literally being me, being the person I feel that I am. Yeah. And in life, I happen to be 6'8" tall. So I do stand out, which is sometimes a blessing, sometimes a curse. But something else that I have lived and struggled with was how much I was expected to live a life compliant to my parents' wishes to make them feel comfortable.
Yes.
Does that ring true for a lot of for the essence of your work?
I've watched so many people deal with that, where they want to live up to this ideal, this ideal that's so narrowly defined, and this idea that facilitates other people's comfort so they can say, oh, I did a good job as a parent, or, as a society, we did all the right things. And there aren't really right or wrong things. There are things that facilitate wellness, things that cause harm. And if the things that you want to be who you are aren't causing anyone any pain or harm, then have at it, explore it. You may find that you really love it. You may find that you don't love it and that you want to do things differently. But I think that those impositions of other people's values and ideas are the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see for someone like you or anyone out there who has had to live under that type of family system or community system or social system, it's hard to get out of it.
Yeah.
It's really tough to get out of it, but it's a practice. It's a daily practice. And that's a part of the reason why I do the work I do, because all of us are socialized in systems that try to make us small. And so at a certain point you say, well, what do I want? What do I actually want? Not what should I want, not who should I be, but who am I? And what do I want?
Well, of course, here we are sitting here. I'm a white man, you're a Black woman, and you do this incredible work for the Black community. Tell me, I mean, this may seem like a dumb question, but just you know why you do this, but for our people watching this, why is your research so important to the Black community?
There were so few people empirically studying Black sexuality from a sex positive lens when I started my dissertation work. And so I was drawing on scholars in other fields and people who had outstanding Black feminist theory around sexual pleasure, sexual health, but we hadn't tested a lot of these pieces. We hadn't collected human subjects research, and I wanted to be one of the people who contributed that. I went to Spelman College, and it's a college in Atlanta for Black women. Most of my professors were Black women. Most of my classmates were Black women. And so for 4 years, the world revolved around what would it be like if you were well, if you were the change agent, if you were the person who could advance your ideas and people would come alongside you and reward you and affirm you. And so from that type of foundation, then I felt really confident to be anything and do anything. So I graduated from the University of Georgia with my PhD. And I had the type of advisor who was like, even if you're not studying the things I'm studying, I'm going to support you in what you wish to know. And so I did my dissertation on Black men of Caribbean descent and their sexual health, how they define it. So starting with how we define sexual health, I think a lot of the work we do on the margins, so marginalized identities, people with sexual marginalization, gender marginalization, racial marginalization, able-bodied, all of that stuff can have an impact for the whole, for everyone.
Yeah.
I have a study out right now examining Black people's definitions of good sex. And so in many of the studies on sexual health, sexual wellness, pleasure, satisfaction, all of these constructs are narrowly defined by like a small group of people. I'm like, well, what if we ask Black folks how they define it? And then they came up with a list of, we have 20 different things that can be included in good sex. And I'm like, this is really actually universal, but we never go in that direction. And so I'm hoping to develop a scale of good sex that can be used for everyone, but it's developed from the viewpoint of people who've been marginalized, because then you get those nuances of good sex that when you just describe folks like you who might have been raised in a system where you should be a certain way and this is the way to be, you might have liked this aspect of good sex, but didn't feel like you could say it, didn't feel like you could live in it or experience it. So our list might become a scale that really gets at what good sex is for all of us and not just some of us.
God, so powerful. You talk about your research and the people who, I'd love to know who, through all your investigations, who has inspired you who has helped you, anyone our viewers should know about, people they can use to further research this whole subject.
Absolutely. So I think about my primary collaborator is Dr. Shamika Thorpe. And she studies sexual pleasure and sexual pain, and specifically among Black women and Black women with sexual marginalization. So bisexual Black women, sexual gender minority Black women, thinking about it through that lens. Dr. Nikki Coleman, who studied how hip hop scripts and scripts in media influence sexuality. I have a list of like Black feminist women who are in the same community with me who practice in the field. And so they are doing the work through Sex Down South or through what it looks like to experience menopause as a Black woman and what that means for your sexuality, thinking about North Carolina, SexCon, and all of these people who were a part of our community-based participatory action research project. So the Big Sex study was me and Dr. Thorpe as co-leading the project, but Dr. Coleman and Omi, who's Black Girl's Guide to Menopause. And we had some work with Ashley Towns and so many people. I mean, I could go on. There was a number of 10 people, but they were community practitioners and sex educators and leaders and theorists. And we were like, we want to do this science. We want to do the scientific part of it. Give us what we should ask and we'll go ask it. So that type of community, it was a fun experience. Let me just say that.
Fascinating. I should think utterly fascinating. You talk of exploring. I've been really interested to know, is there anything that would be worth knowing from the perspective of better understanding Black men? You say you've researched their perspective of healthy sexuality. Is there anything you discovered which was worrying, shocking, or surprising in your research that might interest our watchers?
I think the thing that wasn't surprising to me, but that was surprising to some folk, is that loving, like sex, good sex being loving, was in their top 10 for Black men. And people have stereotypes about Black men having high sexual prowess and being sexually dominant, but very few people think about Black men approaching sex through a lens of loving their partner, loving themselves and the people that they're engaging with sexually. And so I think that's something that we found that most folks might find surprising, but could open their eyes to the questions they ask Black men or the ways they think about engaging Black men in sexual health interventions or sexual health education.
I think anything, Candice, that can reduce the stigma of seeing a Black man as dangerous, as violent, to see him as loving is such a beautiful thing. Why can't he be loving? Right. I'm looking, I've got your website on my other screen, by the way. And tell me, how much does this link into? If you go to Candice's website, you'll see under her podcast section, How to Love a Human, which I read about this afternoon when I was researching you myself. Tell me more about that.
Sure. So I'm actually relaunching the podcast. We currently have 20 episodes right now, and September 5th, we'll relaunch it. We'll do seasons. But I ask people, what would the world be like if it loved you? And I ask people with all types of identities from all types of walks of life, because I'm trying to co-construct a definition of love that leads to liberation. And I don't think I have the only perspective on that. So I have to do that in community by asking folks, what does love look like? Sometimes folks say love looks like action. It looks like responsibility. It looks like letting go. All of these things, I want to think through them together. And this season, I'm looking forward to bringing on some guests who have done a lot of activism work like I had in the past, academic activism, work in the community, lots of media where they talk about liberation, to ask them their perspectives and to keep thinking through this loving world that we're hoping to create.
Love is a word which, in my time, I'm 55 years of age, and I have struggled hugely with sex addiction. I was abused as a kid. And so I grew up seeing the world as quite a scary place.
Yeah.
And I can sit here today and very sadly say I have weaponized the word love. I've used it to gain access to people, most specifically women, and to exploit. And I'm thrilled to hear you. It's anyone that can create a sphere in which people can say, yeah, what is love? What does it really mean to me? It's just, I love you so I can get into bed with you.
Yep.
And that's sadly how I misused it for a long time. I would like to think that today I do have a better understanding of the word love, but if the work you're doing is so important to better understand the word love.
And the self-reflection that you're talking about now is important, because our idea of love, our utilization of love will evolve, right? And it sounds like you're in that process of evolving the way you understand and use love, the way you experience for yourself as a person who has survived sexual violence is a part of that process. So do you feel deserving of love? And when you do, you approach love in a different way. And when you don't, then you have to have a lot more compassion for yourself in that process as you learn. So a part of how to love a human is that you're the first human that you want to figure out how to love, because in many cases, the world hasn't been so loving, and it has been a scary place. It has been full of terrors, and that's what we're working to dismantle.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to look far beyond the local newspapers in
Right.
any community, sadly, to see testament to what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And I only need to say the word Ukraine, right. and for example, and yeah, there's a lot of struggles with love on this planet right now. Tell me your research, which is clearly essential and critical. I'm going to ask a question which I ask from my heart, because I think it's important to remember the fact, again, you're a Black lady, I'm a white man. So I'm going to ask a question from the white man's perspective, mm-hmm. because I think it's critical we have as much cross-pollination as possible. So how do you think your research edifies white people? Because if I put that into blunt perspective, I'm a white man. Why should I be interested in your research on Black people when I'm not Black? Does that make sense?
It does. I think that's a question that a lot of people implicitly ask when they don't cite Black women.
Right.
When they don't look for our research, when they don't cite it, when they feel like they can use studies on white samples and generalize them to everybody else in the world. And when you ask it explicitly, it makes it plain. How are we connected as human beings? So there's a way that the relationship between privilege and marginalization is symbiotic. So in many cases, white people benefit from the ways that Black people or people of the global majority have been marginalized. And it's also important because in the context of the global majority, white people only make up about 14% of the world. And so to not understand the other 86% means you're really short-sighted. Right. And you want to have a global perspective. You want to have deep knowledge of your area. So if your area is sexual addiction, or your area is kink, or your area is love, and you only know about it from a white lens, it may miss the mark on so many pieces. And a lot of white folks' liberation is tied to divesting from some of the entitlements that come with whiteness so that they can mutually benefit from a healthier world. So that you can mutually benefit from better sex. So it's not exploitive, but reciprocal. And I think that's why it's important. So when I gave that study about how Black people define good sex, if a white person reads that, they're going to find themselves in it too. Because in many ways, I've had to learn things about white culture that white people haven't had to learn about Black culture. And so if I define good sex as transcendent and pleasurable and passionate and consensual, and all of these, the ways that Black people define it, one of those words is going to resonate with you as well. But if you're not willing as a white person to even look, you might miss it. You might miss the places where we actually already connect.
What would you say to white people, to white men, to white women who scoff at you and say, this is just a Black community thing? Can you give some hardcore examples of what you would say to someone that naively and arrogantly said that to help maybe soften their approach?
Well, I guess it depends on what's just a Black community thing. That might help me know.
So let me, how do I better ask it? Someone comes up to you at a conference and they're white and they've heard your talk. And they say, this is a Black thing. This doesn't affect me, which is sadly, some people might do. There are a lot of very racist people in your country and mine, and I'm proud to say I don't think I'm one of them. But there are people out there who would scoff at you, who would just say, "Yeah, whatever, Black woman trying to be some saint in the Black community." If you had to face someone like that, and I'm asking this question so that we can be real about the challenges you face by doing the incredibly passionate work that you do in a world which is still incredibly misogynistic, homophobic, racist, and your country and mine, sadly, almost the worst of the bunch.
Yeah.
So what do you say to people who are that bloody mind. In England we say bloody minded. If someone's that bloody minded and determined to sort of put you down and say what you're doing is a waste of time, how would you come back at them under those?
Oh, I faced that. So
beautiful. Tell me.
I do healing racial trauma work as well as sexual wellness work, and so I've had a lot of good media around the work I do in anti-racism, and then there are some people who feel like that work means it's going to erase white people, or say all white people are bad, or dehumanize white people, or maybe treat white people the way other people with racially marginalized identities have been treated. And so in that fear of losing power and losing ground and recognizing their own sense of impotence, they lash out, right? And that lash out can be really violent, can call me names, which has happened, or write incredibly negative media about me, misrepresent my work. And it's painful, but it's not unexpected because I understand history. So my understanding of history is that, I could say something to you and have this argument, but if you're really not in a place where you want to hear, or you want to know, or you want to learn, then why would I do that for free?
Right. Love it.
But if you're in a place where you want to heal and you want to learn and you want to grow, then this is how much it costs to do that with me. Because, my emotional labor and my time and my intellect has already historically been exploited. So I wouldn't do that work for free. So if you pull me to the side at a conference or something and say that, I'll be like, well, I'm not sure where you got that perspective, but I hope you work through that. If you want to work through it with me, this is the invoice. If you don't want to work through it with me, okay. And then I go deal with my own pain or my own injury in a space that's welcoming, in a space that's affirming. But I'm really welcome and open to folks who are white, folks who have other identities that I don't have, men, all of that, who are like, yo, it's time to learn. Like, I really want to be in community with folks who want to have that type of learning experience, because I have things I can learn as a human being with all of my other privileged identities. I'm a cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, neurotypical person. So I have a lot of privileged identity. I'm in middle class, like all of these things mean something to my own privileged identity. So I'm willing to learn and be in community with people who have those marginalized identities. So I always welcome those type of conversations. It's a part of the reason why my research team is incredibly diverse, because I don't want to exclude anyone who's willing to learn from that experience. So my research team doesn't just include Black women, and that's important to me.
Candice, it is so clear to me you have such a lovely, calm demeanor. I would almost like to see someone come up to you at a conference and and try and get one over you, because I would just love to see the calm way in which they would say, yeah, if you want to investigate this, here's my invoice. But I mean, going beyond that, we're talking about very real issues here. And I love the fact you're working so fervently to break down barriers, because that's what it is. And it comes back to what we were saying at the beginning, it's bullying. I mean, fundamentally, racism is bullying. Misogyny is bullying. It's how do we deal with bullies? And so often the bully actually needs more help than the victim. If we're going to change society, we have to say, well, why? Look at a 7-year-old on a playground who is able to perpetrate physical violence against another 7 or a 6-year-old. That 7-year-old was not born that violent.
Right.
It had to learn it somewhere. Okay.
And they learn it in the systemic way, not just interpersonally. Like, so if you learn it by, you have a predominantly white neighborhood and access to schools that look better than the schools that are in predominantly Black neighborhoods, even though you're in the same city, that's a lesson to kids, even if nobody said anything, and all of these pieces are how racism includes both the power part, the structures, and the interpersonal piece. And all of that needs to be unlearned and undone.
Have you I'm curious to thinking about historic, the legacy of how white people have treated Black people. There is, correct me if I'm wrong, but to the best of my understanding, there is a deep, long-standing generational anger, and very justifiable anger, from Black people to white people for how we have treated you. Have you, in all of your research, have you stumbled across this anger, this rage being sexualized? Has that been something you've come across?
Honestly, in my studies, when I look at people who've experienced interracial relationships, it usually comes the other way. So in one of my earlier studies on how Black students experience sexual pleasure, it's called It Feels So Good. Some of the Black men in the study were talking about, it's a qualitative study. So they were telling the story about how they had been in relationship with white women. And after the sexual encounter, they had experienced some really dehumanizing language. And so even though in this one particular case, even though the young man was upset and hurt, he still felt like he needed to walk her home and be a gentleman because he didn't want to be referred to as a brute or to be, you know, said that like, see, you're confirming a stereotype about Black men, even though she said something about Black men not being good parents or something like that. It was really painful for him, but he was like, I have to be the bigger person in this. I haven't as much seen Black folks who want to like shift the rage into a sexual setting, but I'm sure it exists somewhere. That's not what I have studied. So I can see it happening, but I don't know in what way.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that you haven't come across it, because I think it shows that it kind of destroys so many myths that society and poorly educated people hold. You know, there are so many myths about what white people think of Black people.
Yeah.
But we're people. You're on your own website, and how to love a human. We're human beings. I've seen, through my research and my work, and I'm an addiction recovery coach, so I specifically help hurting men.
Yeah.
But I've watched a lot of videos and attended a lot of workshops to educate myself, and I've seen some wonderful experiments where they put a bunch of kids probably up to the age of 4 in a room, and doesn't matter what color they are, they just love.
Yep.
And I love that. And that's when I teach men who maybe, fair few of my clients are struggling with misogyny, not so much racism, because of the community I'm working in, that doesn't come across me much, but certainly misogyny, big time, huge. And I say to people, you weren't born misogynistic. You weren't born homophobic, and you weren't, for that reason, for that matter, people are not born racist. You have to learn it somewhere. So I help clients see that this is a learned pattern. So if you can learn something, you can just as easily unlearn it.
Here's the thing that makes it complicated. Let me know if you've seen this in your work. So for misogyny in particular, a lot of men learn it from other men, and they're policed around how misogynistic they are. Meaning that if they don't endorse out loud some of these misogynistic ideas, when other men are endorsing it, they will be bullied. 100%. They will be harmed, by other men. And so it's a reinforcing system where it's like, maybe I do want to unlearn this, but am I going to lose my whole community when I unlearn it? Am I going to lose my status in that community or my relationships in that community? Am I going to be brutalized and violated if I unlearn misogyny? The same thing applies to racism. And so what you're willing to give up, what kind of comforts you're willing to let go of, make a huge difference in your ability to cultivate an anti-racist mindset or an affirming feminist mindset, or, it's not just like that unlearning piece, but it's like you have to create a whole new community, or else you could be subject to the very violence that you once perpetuated.
That lands really close to home for me. I have a client at this present time, and I will obviously be highly discreet. I will say he has a family. He was living in an African country. His wife, after a number of years of marriage, decided she had had enough of his misogynistic ways, and very sadly chose to move back to England. He then found me, and I have had to guide him to help him understand that just because he lives in a highly misogynistic society, unless he can break that chain, he has no hope with his wife. And what's fascinating is, I've been working with this guy for just over a year now. He just recently turned to one of his friends, male friends, in the African country from which I'm not going to name the country, but from which he comes. And he sat down, had a real heart-to-heart with a friend who had been judging him, judging his wife as the one at fault.
Yep.
But I'm proud to say he stood up to this guy.
Yeah.
Said, no, this is not her problem. This is my problem.
Yes.
And
this is a society problem.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love you bringing that out. It is so, the peer pressure that people face in all manner of situations is huge to conform for fear of being ousted from their group.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because the excommunication is real.
Massive. It's a feeling of that fear of rejection, that fear of being thrown out, abandoned, unwanted, unloved.
Yes.
It's massive. And of course, here we are. We're talking about principles. We're not talking about black or white here. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
Candice, I'm looking back now at the last 3 years. A lot has changed in 3 years. Have you noticed any particular themes sort of through your work? Anything that's changed specifically because of the global situation, the pandemic, and the loneliness, with billions of people being condemned to sit in their houses, twiddle their thumbs, surf pornography, do whatever they've done to keep themselves from going insane? Have you noticed any trends surfacing in your work that our viewers might be interested to know about?
I think people had an opportunity to learn a lot of new things about themselves based on who they were housed with. So, so that experience right there, like who were you living with during that time? Were you living with children, partner, friends, family? And how do you engage those relationships when you can't go anywhere? So when you don't have any outlets, I think a lot of folks learned important information through social media. Many more people got on social media. You saw TikTok boom, and there are a lot of people in our field who do sex education. So the things you didn't get from school, in positive ways, you can get them from social media, but also, negative things too. I think that there were also folks who succumbed, unfortunately, to substance misuse because they were trying to numb and not feel the pain of that loneliness and not feel the pain of like loss and grief and everything that came with the pandemic and the way the world has unfolded through the course of the pandemic. And all of these pieces impact us sexually. All of these pieces show up in our sexual self-awareness and sexual behaviors and attitudes. You've seen, in the United States anyway, our reproductive justice system just crumble very much in the past 2 months. And so with that, you have a lot of people who are able to conceive and give birth, rethinking what it means to parent in this type of world, what it means to have choice or not have choice in this type of world. So I think there's still so much to uncover about what the global pandemic has meant to us sexually. But what I've found at the core of it is that people have become clearer about what they do want as the world opens up, what they hope for and what they desire. And that clarity, I'm hoping, can lead to not misuse of those or that erotic power, but to really use it in a way that helps everybody get a little more free.
This question may be just too out there. Do you think from what you've just said, do you think it's benefited men or women more?
What part?
So you just said the pandemic has given people an opportunity to decide what they really want. Do you think that has benefited men more than women, or women more than men, or is that just too out there to answer?
No, actually, I'm not sure. I don't know who it's benefited more yet. That'll be interesting to see, like how men experience this compared to how women experience this time.
Yeah, I think it's probably too early to tell. Kind of looking to the future, anything that you would love to tell people, what's on the horizon for you, for your work and anywhere where any notable place you're going to be speaking? How can people tap into you?
Okay, great. Well, I'm working on a book proposal now, so I'd like for that to be agented and submitted to a publisher by the end of this year.
Good luck with
on good sex and what that means universally, but through the lens of a Black woman and Black scholars talking about it. So to the earlier question you asked me about how what I know and what I study can be applicable universally, I think that book will be an answer to that question.
Amazing.
And continuing to work on with my research team, analyzing these big sex study data. I'm really curious about how partner status and the privilege that comes with being in a committed partnership facilitates pleasure and sexual functioning.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at it not through the lens of you should be partnered, but that because the world thinks you should be partnered, there comes a lot of privilege with that identity. I'm saying that as a woman who is married, and thinking through all of these pieces have been really exciting for me. So just continuing to analyze those data. I don't know about speaking engagements around sexual wellness. I did so many in the past year with Quad S and S-Star. And I was going to come to SASH, but then I had a board meeting during the time where I was going to accept my award. So unfortunately, I won't make it to SASH this year, but I want to go next year. And just be in community with folks, meet people, listen to all the good work that's being done. Because what I love to do is learn. Like I like to stay abreast of the new things people are coming up with, the new ways people are investigating sexualities, and all the topics that I still could stand to learn.
So, guys, that's amazing. And so with everything we've just said, what I would like our audience to now realize is you are this year's SASH Research Award winner, because we recognize you have done so much and are continuing to do so much to help this incredibly understood community, this community that needs your help, that needs so many more people to speak out about it. So congratulations. I'd like to wrap up. Is there anything else you would like to share with our audience about anything related to what we've talked about, anything on your horizon, any things you'd like to advertise? Take
Sure.
a step and grab the moment.
Yeah, join my community on Instagram at Dr. Candice Nicole. I love to have conversations like these all the time with folks who are in that community. And you can follow me on IG, on Facebook, and I'll be starting my YouTube page where I do conversations around how to love a human in a similar format. So
amazing.
I'd love to see you there.
Amazing. You are clearly a very loving person, Candice. You have a lovely aura about you. Thank you for giving me your time, for giving SASH your time, and for supporting SASH, for supporting SASH as you do. Have a wonderful rest of your year. And yes, congratulations again on being our Research Award winner.
Thank you.
Guys, it has been such a joy. Thank you for your valuable time too. You work so hard. It's been immensely pleasurable talking to you. And I look forward to meeting you one day in the flesh.
One day. It was great talking to you too.
Thank you so much, Candice. God bless. Bye for now.